Ricky, let's talk about Wicked. Let's talk about anticipation going in. We are a duo that has not seen the musical.
Not
So
big play guys.
we have not been on Broadway to see Wicked, the second highest grossing musical of all time on Broadway, only behind The Lion King. What was your familiarity with this story, Ricky Flix? How much did you know going into this movie about the story?
Okay, so I knew about the two of them, Glinda and Elphaba. They go to school together, and it's the prequel of The Wizard of Oz, and it's basically the story of how they got to where they're at, right? That's what I knew about it. And I also knew that the duo of whoever's playing Glinda and Elphaba is like iconic, right? Um, it's like Idina Menzel, and then whoever the heck the other person is like the iconic one. But
Shout out
like,
Frozen. Shout out Let It Go.
it's like Kristen something. But I don't remember. But point is, it's like a long lineage of this play of like iconic dynamic duos, right? And now it seems like Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, two like seasoned vets. Cynthia Erivo, Tony for The Color Purple back in 2015 to 2017, like she on Broadway. So like clearly some Broadway stage actors here that they have had experience on the big screen, maybe not to the same praise as they've gotten on the smaller screen or on stage, but it was clearly up their wheelhouse to kind of like mesh the two together here in Wicked Part 1. So for me, like I only knew kind of the general stuff, not too much, but a key focus going in was going to be if these two could live up to the expectations, I guess, of a lot of the Broadway fanatics out there that have high expectations for whoever's playing these two roles on Broadway.
So I didn't know that background you just said about Cynthia Erivo and her performance with The Color Purple and her presence on Broadway. I'm not surprised though after you said that, and then following my viewing of this movie, she was unbelievable. She has pipes, right? Nice pipes, Tamika. Nice pipes. She is absolutely killing it in this movie.
Yeah.
And she has to sing next to Ariana Grande, who's one of the biggest pop stars of this generation. This is kind of interesting when you look at pop stars. Do they really have like these great voices? Well, we're going to put her next to the girl who like stole the show in The Color Purple on Broadway. So there's just like a different showcasing of star power here. Two powerhouse performances that I thought were great. And it looks like you're about to hop in there.
Yeah, and like doing a little more research and talking to Miss Flix, who is big into Broadway. So I guess there's debate of like the GOAT on Broadway, who has the best voice, and Cynthia Erivo's in the conversation.
Once again, I am not surprised. Absolutely incredible performance in this movie, especially the last 20 minutes, just really cemented that this is one of the best musical adaptation performances I think I've ever seen. But in terms of what I was expecting, Ricky Flex, I only knew this was like an origin story for the witches. I didn't really know how much it was going to be like sympathetic to the story of the Wicked Witch of the West and Elphaba, which I didn't know her name going in. It's going to be very tough for you to pronounce that the entire time through the podcast. Thought about that as I was reading the synopsis, Ricky Flex. We're going to push through it. Wicked Witch of the West always works, or just Cynthia Erivo. I did not know much about the Glinda character. I only knew her from The Wizard of Oz and short screen time. Seems like picture perfect, like beauty versus like ugliness. And I was always interested in the Oz story and the Oz origins, so I thought I was attracted to the story. I didn't know how it would fit exactly into the narrative, how it would be shaped. But as someone who was unfamiliar, I think it was actually pretty well fitting for the Wizard of Oz story, Ricky Flex, with the story of them as estranged, peers at Shiz University, this magic school that almost in the first half of the movie felt like a Hogwarts type of situation where it's like two people on opposite ends of the spectrum. They're like the Harry and Draco, to start the movie, but then eventually they come together. That's where it kind of separates itself. So I think overall, in the way it paints the Wicked Witch of the West or Elphaba as an outsider, and then builds her up to be like almost this person that's blamed, and it's like a scapegoat almost for Oz, and is someone to kind of distract the people of Oz of the terrible things that the wizard is doing, that Michelle Yeoh's character is doing. I think it was actually kind of smart that way. That's the story kind of fits into building into the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, I would agree. But we do have a part 2 coming,
Right.
right? You could easily picture this after the movie. I was like, holy crap! Like they don't even need a part 2. Like this kind of like goes into not like the next day Wizard of
We
Oz,
need her more
but
evil.
yeah, we do need her more evil. But you could say like, oh, like if this was just the only movie, you could say, oh, okay, and then she gets really angry and probably lonely and depressed even more, and then she just continues to get more evil as time goes. And I think that's what we're gonna see in part 2. I don't want to jump ahead, but it felt like this was a movie. It wasn't like a cliffhanger at the end, like oh my god, like Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, like where it's clearly a lead going into a part 2. Obviously this is a part 1. They're very outspoken on it, but this did feel like a complete movie, and maybe a part of the reason why the Oscars right now it seems like are being more receptive to it. The Academy's being more receptive to the possibility, the chance of this being nominated for Best Picture potentially.
Yeah, and just also like things that like I was kind of surprised by, and we'll go into initial reactions here. I always loved the way that Emerald City and Munchkin Land, how it was a great example of world building for Oz. I like the idea of going to Shiz University, another place that like, okay, let's learn more about this, and we go back to Emerald City by the end of this. As someone who's not familiar, I don't know how expansive this world is, so I like going to somewhere different. And I just think it really built well into the story. Just also like the animals, how they play into the story. It seems kind of childish at points, you know, and we'll talk about that. But I think having like the flying monkeys having a purpose, right, and how maybe that they are loyal at some point to the Wicked Witch of the West, it seems like they care really about the lore of the Wizard of Oz, you know, and this is a play that's gone on for 20 years. That really stuck with me. Keeping Emerald City, having the wizard also be like this darker type of character with Jeff Goldblum, I think is perfectly cast. I just think it fit all together very well, and it honors the legacy. And I also think that it's really being well received by the people who love the musical specifically, not really just the Wizard of Oz. You know, that was the main takeaway as well.
Yeah. Oh God. Like the Broadway fan base is rabid, right? Like this is the second. This is like they're a baby for them. They have the Lion King and this, like biggest ones ever, right? So like this, you got to make sure the fans are on board. For us, like for non-musical lovers, like we love our fair share of musicals, but like for non-Broadway, fanatics, isn't less important. We're not the fan base that's trying to, or that they're what is it, Universal, trying to draw out to the theaters. We're trying to get these Broadway fanatics out here to see this movie 1 time, 2 times, 3 times over the next 2 weeks, right? And they're going to be
Yeah.
incredibly successful because of what you just said and laid out there, that they paid homage very well to the Broadway play, and also just the not the lineage, the actual just workings of the Wizard of Oz, right? They're paying homage, right?
Yeah, I do think I like this movie. So going into like initial reactions, this is kind of what I think that if someone who doesn't like or sees all the Marvel movies, they go in to watch like Infinity War. This is like an outsider go of a world they don't understand going to watch a movie, but thoroughly enjoying it. That was me going to see Wicked. This was the Infinity War for Broadway nerds. That's exactly what it was. Think about it. It's you replace action scenes with musical numbers. Those are the highlights, and that is like the John M. Chu, the director here, feeding the fans, right? Pleasing the fans of the Wicked and Broadway like fandom there. It's also the runtime. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes of a part 1, right? That is a long movie, and it feels long for someone who doesn't know the musical very well, that asks like, why are there literally stopping, and maybe at points where you're like, maybe they don't need a musical number here. This one is extending for maybe far too long. And it seems like all of these soundtracks are so beloved and needed to be included. You can't skip over them. So it's like the director saying, I don't care if you are someone who's never seen the musical, we have to include this, you know? and then how it has the epic ending cliffhanger leads into part two. Even the look of this movie, I felt like I was watching a Marvel movie at some points. Okay. I just thought there was an obvious connection there. And this is like where I also said, like, if you don't love Marvel movies, you could still love like Infinity War. That was me watching this, Ricky.
Yeah, I don't think you have to be a huge Broadway fan to like this. I thought this was good. This was a lot of fun. I think, like going back to the Gladiator, I think that is going to age better than it is right now. People are being like, because that I think a lot of people's expectations was higher. Best Picture winner, Russell Crowe performance, like you know, Gladiator's an all-time movie. Here's an all-time musical, and people were just nervous that it wasn't going to live up to the expectations. It's like kind of the opposite. And how this one's going to age is going to be interesting. I think maybe for the Broadway fanatics, it's not going to matter. They're going to love it because they got it right. For us, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's going to age very well because of the length, the dragginess. There are weird tone changes throughout. And it's part one, and we kind of have to see what happens in part two. And I think for again the non-Broadway fans, that's going to play more of a part where it might not just age as well.
And the Broadway part of it, I want to talk about the music. And I thought there were some really cool numbers. Okay. However, a lot of the songs I think it felt very long, like these sequences and their choreography that goes into them. And I looked at you and I said, like, I think the song's been going on for like 5 to 7 minutes. This is a long scene and it doesn't seem very consequential. You know, some of the scenes seem like very important, and even ones that don't move the narrative along, like the popular one, it tells you everything you need to know about the Glinda character, but with Ariana Grande, and the song's pretty catchy. But there are so many other songs where I'm like, it feels like we're going nowhere, you know, and it's showcasing the abilities of the actors. We get it; they're really good at their job, but it's really playing into the 2-hour 40-minute runtime, and I'm getting tired. You know, did you feel that at all when you were watching?
I felt exhausted at the end of this movie for that
Yeah.
reason. I was exhausted, and it was even at the end. And I'm not jumping into spoilers, but like, come on, you know. But at the end, the best song, "Defying Gravity's" on, and it's an absolute banger. And Cynthia Erivo is giving it her all. And then the song ends, she flies, but then all of a sudden she comes back. Then she goes, "Defying Gravity," and then she goes again. And then she comes back and she goes, "Gravity." It's just like, how many times are we gonna like start and stop, start, stop?
It felt so Broadway though.
It
That
literally
feels
was
Broadway.
never ending. It's like you can't let go. It's like this song's so good and she's so good. Let's just continue it, even though it's ended 5 minutes ago. It was like, holy crap, I'm done. Like we get it.
It almost
she flies
reminds
away.
me of like Animal House, where it's like, shut up, she's on a roll. You know, it's just like, don't stop her. She's gonna keep going. That's where it felt like Broadway, where it's like, maybe let her say it again because you know the crowd's gonna go crazy for it. And you know, the crowd was like clapping too. We had an amazing crowd in
Great crowd.
Dolby. We saw like great surround like system that's going on. That was really diehards. We saw seas of green that were everywhere. Wicked socks, shirts, merch left and right. We picked a good crowd. And I think also that Defying Gravity, best song, definitely. I think I had Popular at number 2. But the Defying Gravity, it re-energized the crowd after a 2.5 hour movie. Like that last 10, 15 minutes.
We were waiting for it.
Could feel the runtime, but by when they left the theater, they were energized. They were excited to see what happens next. And Cynthia Erivo did that. And also, the visuals looked the entire movie in that last 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah. I want to talk. I want to talk about the visuals, but I want to keep talk. But I want to talk one last thing about like the songs and how long they were. There's the one that the time when you said like, man, how long has this song been going on? It was in the middle of the movie when the guy, the prince or whatever, comes into the frame. Forget his name.
Jonathan Bailey.
Yeah, that is the one where it was like, holy crap, this song will never end. And they switched locations, they changed times, like they speed up time, and the song ended, but then they start up again. And it's like, whoa, like what? We're doing this again. That was like the one where I'm like, that's the poster child of like Broadway to cinema and why like there's miscues all the time when we try to do these adaptations, because it just doesn't work. It never works. And they try it again here. And I think the only thing that saves it is that it didn't look as bad as it did in like the trailers, or like the ending song is just like so good with Cynthia Erivo. It's like, all right, we'll let this slide. right?
Yeah.
Just because the talent is so freaking good. So I think that's just like one of those things where we highlight in these musical adaptations, like, all right, let's wrap it up here and get to the next scene, right? I'm trying to get out of here in 2 hours. Instead, we're there for 3 hours and we're like, oh my God, I need to go to bed.
Right. And you mentioned the visuals. This was a huge watch for this when you go see this movie after the trailer, where it's the visuals were highly criticized after basically all three trailers that came out, and people were seeing if it was a finished product, how would it look on screen. And the way I will describe it is what I said previously. This is not the most beautiful movie you will ever see. There is a lot of CGI to this movie, and I will say it feels like just a very well made Marvel movie. That's what it looked like to me. And I am not going to say it was unbelievable. If you want me to say it, if you think this movie looks beautiful, there are some Marvel movies that you have to say look beautiful. That's my opinion on it. And I will say the last part with the alphabet character, Cynthia Erivo flying on the broomstick, that looks so amazing. It looked like the entire visual effects budget went to that because that's the lasting impact. Like that's our, I was like, wow, this looks incredible. The animals talking look fine too. Okay. It's like the world itself, the Shiz University, where it's like you could maybe some of those set is practical, maybe the background is a little bit sketchy. There is a Easter egg of the Wizard of Oz in the very beginning of the movie where the Dorothy, Scarecrow, Tin Man, and the Lion are going down the yellow brick road, and I'm like, that's fake. That is fake.
But yeah, that was the fakest thing in the movie.
Yeah.
But the thing that I wanted to bring up about that opening scene, the lion. It was an actual lion, like walking on all fours.
Oh, it was walking.
Yes,
Okay.
it was a normal lion walking on all fours and not two like what we think of the Wizard of Oz as a lion.
Why do you think they did that?
Well, because the movie they use real animals.
Oh, you're right. Smart, Ricky. Smart.
So, but I almost like tapped you. I'm like 4 legs.
Yeah,
that's a real lion.
Yeah, honestly, the goat, the literal goat, not like the greatest of all time, but like also the greatest of all time. Peter Dinklage, so good in this movie as this goat character, the one that's like the ones that are being blackballed. And no,
yeah, can we talk about that for a second?
These animals that are being targeted by the government, I think, because they don't want them to be able to speak. They want them to just do their job, right? What animals are supposed to do. It's fitting that's like at a university. It's a professor. There's like an underground society that Elphaba like walks in on. It fits, but get to your thing.
Dude. It is so weird. Like it was weird.
As someone who has not seen the play, it was off-putting. Where I'm just like, is this really like a main plot line for this movie?
This is why Dorothy kills the Wicked Witch of the West is because animals can't talk anymore.
Yeah, that's where it's like, this is not a huge part of the movie at all. It's not even a part of the movie. When it becomes a focus of the musical, it's just like, okay, this is where it separates a little bit from what I know, right? Maybe it's something that's in the books, that Frank Baum books, and maybe something that is a bigger storyline. I would assume that's the case, and I would assume why that's where it's just different from the movie.
Yeah, I think like the theme of like authoritarianism, right? Like authoritarian government. It's crazy to say that for this movie, but that is true. Like that's kind of what they're trying to tell you.
He's a literal scapegoat. He's a literal scapegoat.
Yes,
it's not an accident.
Yeah, no, and like obviously the Elphaba character can obviously relate to what's going on because of what she's been through her whole life. I get it, but this oppression, it was just so weird totally with what was going on with Ariana Grande's Glinda character, like with most of the movie, and they're just throwing this at you left and right, and I'm just like, I don't know if this is really, I get it, but is it good? The whole movie, like it just added to another layer of overstuffedness and almost a 3-hour runtime. And I like Jeff Goldblum. I think it's perfectly casted as like a fraud that we talked about, the Wizard of Oz, a fraud Oz who's supposed to be smart. He's similar to like, I would say it was like a PG Ragnarok Jeff Goldblum leader type of character.
Not as hammy, tone that brings it down a little bit.
Yeah. So I think it worked. It's just like it's already 2 hours 43 minutes, and we're getting like it's wicked. Like this movie, it's like a Marvel movie. It's like, what are we doing?
I would say also like the idea like the scapegoat was a little on the nose. The idea of like Alphabet being treated like as a minority or an outsider, like all of it is like a little bit too on the nose. But like if you know the play really well, it's just like you don't care about that. But if someone's like you're just wondering about the story and people are saying this is an Oscar movie, this could win Best Picture, when it's like it's just not that deep, bro. That's like what it is. It's just not that deep of a movie, and that's where it's also like, hey, that's why this is more Marvel universe than it is like Oscar winner. You know, it leans more that way, and the performances is what like says like, okay, you could see it at the Oscars. That's the difference, right? That's like what is like that is at the level of probably at like up there with like the best stuff we've seen this year, just acting wise with Arrivo and Grande. For me specifically, Arrivo. Grande is really good at getting on my nerves in this movie, you know, and I think she fits the bill perfectly. But both those people, I think, take the movie up to another level for someone that doesn't know the Wicked play very well.
Yeah, without the Wicked lore, you could just tell like if you miscast those two, or you just like they're not as talented as those two, then this movie is a disaster. Like,
Yeah,
it is a disaster because, like I mentioned, the tone, like the visuals, like aren't necessarily bad. Like especially after the trailer, like definitely in post production, they cleaned it up after that trailer. They cleaned it up, and it looked a lot better than the big screen. I'll give them credit there. But if you didn't have two great, not good, great lead performances, this movie is probably a shit show.
I,
So I would say like it helps with the adaptation. Obviously, it helps when you have like 2 decades worth of experience to look back at these performances and kind of doing that stage type of performance on the big screen, and with two talented performers. And I'll just say, John Chu, someone I've been critical of, he's good with the musicals. He is good. He is good. And this is, I would say, besides Crazy Rich Asians, this is his second best movie.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of Crazy Rich Asians. You know that the listeners, the loyal listeners of TDI know I'm a Crazy Rich Asians guy. This feels like a win for me, you know, for like the John Chu like hive. I'm a fan, but he did In the Heights as well, correct, John Chu?
Correct. And I think this is better than In the Heights
I think
by like
so as
a
well.
lot.
But I also think not only was Arrivo and Grande good, I do think that there was a couple other supporting characters I wanted to shout out. Jeff Goldblum, excellently cast, a little bit slimy. Okay. I like how he was so like, oh, no, duh, it's not me in that actual suit. You know, I'm just like a guy. Like, I'll talk to you like man to man or like person to person. Like, it seemed personable, but also like there is, oh, you see the darkness that is hinted at, you know, with like the back, like with the Wizard of Oz, and you see like more of that person that's coming out. And when I watched the Wizard of Oz, I'm like kind of like, why is he doing this? But you see like the level of power he has, like in Oz, and how everyone looks towards him. He feels like a god. That's why he does it. You know, he feels like a god. That's what like keeps him like doing this crazy, having this crazy facade. Um, Jonathan Bailey. I want to talk about this guy. I think in most movies, this type of character would be super simple and it's generic. I do think he elevates this character to something more than it should be. I think this guy's really good. Like this guy could be like it could have been so surface level, but instead it's like, yes, this guy's good looking. He could be the guy who is like from a very rich family. He's like royalty. You know, he's in terms of he's very materialistic, but he has a little bit of depth to him. The scenes with him and Cynthia Erivo, I think, are really, really good, and like that shows like there's something more to his performance. I want to shout this guy out because he is going to be big. This guy, I'm calling it now. He is going to be massive. I think he's going to be in the Jurassic World franchise that's coming up with Scarlett Johansson and Mahershala Ali. But I wouldn't be surprised if this guy does more blockbuster stuff because he's got the looks, he's got chops. Just someone that I think we got to keep on our radar.
Yeah, I totally agree. This guy, Bridgerton guy. So he
He's
has
a
like that.
Bridgerton guy.
He's a
He
Bridgerton
looks
guy.
like a Bridgerton guy.
Yep, he's a Bridgerton guy, and I will say he's been on the come up since Bridgerton because he did Bridgerton. Obviously, that's been big, huge. And then he was in a show and nominated for an Emmy this past year with Matt Bomer. And obviously, Matt
Okay.
Bomer, White Collar, recently in Maestro, and trying to get in the movie biz again. Um, I think it's a Showtime show. It's Fellow Travelers. So I haven't watched it, but Showtime usually like the shows could be hit or miss, but the performances are usually steady. So this guy clearly is on the up and up. And I agree with you. I don't know what's his ceiling. I'm still trying to figure that out. I think his I think a good sweet spot, like a safe play, would be like this guy's in next Matt Bomber. Like that would be the safe one. Would be like this guy could be a stud in TV and kind of dabble in movies and make a spark. That is probably like the floor, like an optimistic floor I have for him. And I think that would be obviously a great career, but I think you're right. I think the ceiling is much higher than that.
I don't know. I think he's kind of a guy. I anticipate they tease him at the end of this part one. He will have a presence in part two, and he knows Elphaba. He sees the way that she's being painted as a villain, as wicked by the Michelle Yeoh character and by the wizard himself. So how is he going to play a role in this? Is he going to be a mediator, right? What side will he take in the end? Because at some point, he's going to be torn between a Glinda and an Elphaba, no doubt by the end of this. Other characters here, Peter Dinklage, I said as the GOAT. I looked at you. I'm like, whose voice is that? I'm like, that is a freaking great voice. I love how when we talked about The Wizard of Oz, we were recasting it. We were saying like Peter Dinklage would be a great casting for Oz in 2024 if it was made now, like The Wizard. And we get him in this movie, feels great. Felt like he could do his thing. Michelle Yeoh, I think is solid. John M. Chu, like reunion here. Think of Crazy Rich Asians. I think just they're doing her thing, holds the screen, regal type of thing. I think very good. But the big performances were the head two that we talked about with Arrivo Grande. I think Jonathan Bailey probably in third alongside the Dinklage performance.
Yeah, and I want to I've been fairly critical of SNL past glory days. I would say the last great era was in the 2000s, early 2000s. But I'll shout out Bowen Yang.
He was funny in some scenes.
He was funny. He was funny, and I'll give him his flowers. I thought he was good.
Okay.
And and also we gotta if we're doing, obviously there's a bunch of lore or gossip lore, behind the scenes lore in this movie with freaking the guy that dates Nessa.
SpongeBob.
Yeah, SpongeBob, Ariana Grande. We have to mention him.
I have him right here.
I thought he was fine.
Plays Bach.
Yeah, Bach was his name. He was fine.
He was fine.
He wasn't a standout.
You
could have cast anyone.
I literally only was interested in his character just because of him and Ariana Grande, because like she was like coming off dating like Pete Davidson, and all of a sudden she's coming off. I think she's engaged with this guy who played SpongeBob.
Ethan Slater.
Yeah, Ethan Slater, who played SpongeBob on Broadway. And that's also where it's like they're picking people for this movie that aren't just movie stars. There aren't really movie stars aside from Michelle Yeoh and Jeff Goldblum. And the people that are singing are like Broadway actors. Like they're very talented people. Like it seemed like they were devoted to making this faithful to the musical aspect, right? Make it as close to Wicked as possible. They don't want to get it wrong. Right? They don't want to get it wrong. They want to make sure when they bring it to the screen that it's going to be something that fans adore, and they go and they are fed the slot. That's what John M. Chu did. He fed them
like
the
a
slot.
Marvel movie.
Yes, and Bach, very much anyone could have played this guy. I could have played Bach, just like a sweet, innocent guy. Just has to be with what's her name, Nessa Rose.
All right, what you want to bring up predictions then, and Nessa?
You want to go first? Because I think you're going to say it. This only lines up with what we know about the Wizard of Oz. This is the sister in the wheelchair we're talking about.
Yes, and obviously in the Wizard of Oz, Wicked Witch's sister, Nessa, is freaking murdered by Dorothy in her house.
She's crushed by a house, but now I get it. She couldn't run away.
Yeah, but the socks and like the curled up, like it's all starting to make sense. And then the part two, she's probably going evil. She's probably going to take the side of her sister. She's probably going to be like, because like obviously throughout this movie, she's kind of embarrassed for her sister, right? Because her sister obviously like the green and being an outsider. And then part two, we're probably going to see her like full swing, be on her sister's side, and they're going to be the two evil witches.
And I think jealousy, a little bit of jealousy from Nessa potentially. I don't know. And it seems like they didn't have the best relationship. It seemed like Elphaba really loves her sister. But is that reciprocated a lot in this? Not really. A lot of the time, Nessa's pretty pissed off at Elphaba. Very pissed off at Elphaba. So I want to see how this evolves, because yes, that's immediately what I thought of when this ended. I'm like, this girl's in a wheelchair. It's the sister of the Wicked Witch of the West. What happens to the sister of the Wicked Witch of the West? Gets crushed by a house by Dorothy. Like, okay, so let's see. She has to make quite the transformation. You want to go to other predictions we have for the sequel?
Yeah. So what else you got? Like, I one other one I have is like Michelle Yeoh's character somehow is going to die. I don't know how.
I was kind of curious, how far are we going to go? Like part 2, does it go all the way to the house falling? Does it go all the way there? Like, would we witness the death of Nessa at the end of like Wicked Part 2? Is that how far we go? But I also, I want to know. It was such a good tease when I reflected on the movie, the beginning, and the people are looking at Glinda, who is like the good witch, and she is the hero. And they say like, I heard you were friends with the Wicked Witch. Oh my God, I want to see what are the lengths they go to hurt one another, harm one another in the next movie. Like, how is it going to go where they reach a point of no return? As someone who doesn't know this musical, I am so psyched to see that. I want to see this shit get dark, because it didn't go dark enough, in my opinion.
Definitely not. And like it was dark in every way besides what we wanted to see, the darkness, right? And I think looking at The Wizard of Oz, how scary Margaret Hamilton's portrayal of the Wicked Witch was, I want to see by the end of part 2, Cynthia Erivo somehow pulling that off. I
Yeah.
want to see her being like someone that I'm afraid to look on screen on that, because she is so freaking evil. I want to see that.
Not just a misunderstood, almost anti-hero she feels like at this point. How does she get to the point where she's no longer just a sympathetic figure, but one that just becomes evil?
Right, one that we're not rooting for, because we were rooting for her, obviously, throughout part 1.
She's the hero.
How throughout part 2 are we going to flip the script and be like, oh, we have to like Glinda?
Yes. No,
Even
I'm with
obviously you. The whole point of part 1 is that everyone likes Glinda. And it's like, oh, we're going to end up liking Glinda by the end of this. How? How are we going to do that? I'm actually really intrigued. And I'm not a Broadway guy, but I am not going to see this until I'm going to see this movie over the Broadway play first, so it doesn't ruin. It's like reading the book before the movie. No, you see the movie and then you read the book. See the movie before you see the play.
How are they going to uglify her? Like both like outwardly and inwardly. Like, how are they going to make her someone that is just reprehensible? Like, maybe she doesn't do that. Maybe we're relying too much on the movie rather than what maybe the book says, right? Or whatever the play did that we just don't know. I am excited to see it because I want a darker turn. I want more. We know she can sing. We know she could put on a sad face, but can she just go evil? That's what I want to see, Ricky. Flex, where else do we want to go? Any other predictions before we march on to scores?
I just mentioned Michelle Yeoh's character because she's not in The Wizard of Oz, so I feel like, and she obviously has a hand. She's like the right-hand man of Oz. So, and we know Oz is in The Wizard of Oz, and this is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz. So I feel like Michelle Yeoh, if she's alive, would be in The Wizard of Oz, but she's not. I think she's got to be cut the axe.
That would be satisfying for the audience.
And it's back to what you were saying about like what type of movie this is. This is a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like they're going to be crowd pleasing in part 2.
And is there any other Easter eggs that we failed to mention?
Well, you sent me one that I was going to send you. And it's not really an Easter egg. It's more of a, interesting. Dude, Cynthia, like, the Wicked Witch was crying. And she melts when, she melts with water.
Yeah, that's what I was. When I saw that, I had to send it to you immediately. It was,
and they allude to that with the rain, and then Michelle Yeoh's character gets the umbrella quickly, says, "You're gonna melt," and I'm like, "How does she know? Like, she doesn't even know this person." It still was never answered why she melts with water. It still has never been answered.
And she is crying during a scene that, if you don't know Wicked, we have to talk about this. This is, I think, like the best and worst part of the movie. The scene where Elphaba is wearing the hat that Glinda gives her, that was her grandmother's, and they go to this ball. This is where it felt like Harry Potter. Like, I felt like I was watching like the Goblet of Fire when I was watching this. But all of a sudden, Elphaba goes into some type of interpretive dance, and she's doing Pilates in front of the students, and everyone's like, "Look at this freak." And I'm like, I would say the same thing.
There's no music on.
And it's like, yes, I guess that's like the irony, because it is a musical. There's nothing playing, and she's dancing having such weird movements. And then she's being mirrored by Glinda, and it's a moment of them coming together, tears streaming down Elphaba's face, and then eventually Glinda has like a tear or two or whatever, just looks very sad. During that moment, I'm like, this is the stupidest shit I've ever seen, but somehow I feel something. Somehow I'm like, I do feel like bad for Elphaba, and I'm empathizing with her, like as she's doing it. I'm like, this is dumb, but I do feel emotion from it, no doubt. Ricky Flex, what was your thoughts on this scene? Because obviously this is a huge moment from like the play, I would assume, you know?
Yeah, like when she walks in with the hat on, and obviously right before the scene before is Michelle Yeoh telling Ariana Grande's Glinda, "Hey, like I'm letting you in my class because because Elphaba said she's gonna leave the school if you don't join her." So obviously, like what's coming, like oh she's gonna make her popular or whatever, right? But this was like
It's like a
cringe
John
on
Hughes
cringe.
movie.
Yeah, but like worse. Like John Hughes, at least there's some redeem. Like this was just like hard to watch, like so hard to watch in a movie that's relatively easy to watch because, like I said before, it's a crowd pleaser. This was not pleasing at all. There's so many other ways to do it. This just seemed like John Hughes, like kind of type of movie with like a high school, like high school college dance. Literally, what this was, and for me, I think there's so many other ways you could have done it. This just seemed too generic and cringeworthy.
I was trying to think of a high school movie that this kind of compared to. You know, I was trying to think of like Regina George and Katie Heron. That's kind of what it felt like with Mean Girls, because I kept thinking of Regina George with Glinda, and then I see Lindsay Lohan is like the kid from another country coming to the school, and all of a sudden she is befriended by the popular girl eventually, and then she honestly ascends past Glinda, and she's like all powerful. You know, that's the closest thing I could think of, but there's got to be a better one where two people that like despise each other end up becoming homies, you know, by the end of the movie. I couldn't think of a specific high school movie like that, even though there's been 100 of them.
Yeah, like Breakfast Club. I mean, I'm just going through John Hughes movies.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. You know, stupid question. We don't have to go into it too much.
No, I think overall though, like through the music, even though yes, this movie dragged, it still like was incredibly effective throughout. Like it was at trying to get that the duo right that we talked about off the top in this relationship, and I did say it was cringeworthy, but like for a good reason, right? It was effective, it was good, and the movie itself felt complete when it's a part one. And I think that's just like the hardest thing you could do with multi-movie franchise, like is like making sure each is like it represents its own, like it can stand on its own. And I think this one I'm projecting now is going to stand on its own even with part two. And I arguably say like this was a lot easier to land because of our reservations about how are they going to make the Cynthia Revo character hateable? Like how are they going to do this or that in part two? I think this one was just a lot easier to land and much more complete with everything that we talked about thematically, the relationship and whatnot.
Scores, Ricky Flex. Do you want to go first for Wicked?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. I'll give it a 77.
I'm an 81.
You're in the 80s.
I was at 77. I literally was going to do that. And I'm like, I feel like I'm not giving enough credit to the performances. And I would say the musical numbers hit more than not. And it's fun. This is a fun movie. So I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt 81. And I need a couple more movies to be like, is this up there with like what are the best movies of 2024? I think this has got to be one of the best. This is the upper half.